Sometimes love isn't enough. As an adoptive mom, people would often say this to me, as if to imply I couldn't love my son enough to change behaviors or heal his trauma, so I should probably just give up. At least that's how I took those four powerful words, which had buried themselves deeply in my mind, leading me to doubt my ability to parent my child. Sometimes love isn't enough. That is the truth. Oftentimes, you need love and powerful, personalized tools to raise a child who's experienced trauma and disrupted attachment, or a child who you're struggling to connect with. I am on a mission to help parents raising kids with a tricky past to show up with unconditional love and practical tools to lovingly manage even the most challenging of times. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast and follow us on Instagram and Facebook. Plus, if you like what you hear, I'd love for you to leave a review. Now let's get to the good stuff. Welcome back to Sometimes Love Isn't Enough. I am your host, Angie Grandt, and today I want to talk about something that is close to my heart. So, a few weeks back, I was hosting a local workshop. I was doing some EFT tapping, and I definitely seem to attract parents who have been in similar situations, even when they don't know it. So I was hosting this class just for people who wanted to experience EFT, and it turns out that 3 of the 5 women in that class were all women going through the same kinds of struggles that I had as a parent. So as we're going through our tapping session, one of the moms said, I asked, what came up as we were going through this tapping sequence. And she looked embarrassed and said, "It's hard to say this out loud, but I'm worried that my child is a narcissist." My heart sank when she said that because I've been there too. I've been that mom who, despite all of my best efforts, saw scary things in my own child, and I didn't know what to do with those feelings. I remember when that word narcissism had first been brought up to me. And of course, I went to Google it. I did again today, and wanting to share this story with you. It's a word that's thrown around a lot. Often people will talk about their ex-significant other or ex-spouse as being a narcissist, right? It's a word that we use to describe somebody who's overly selfish. But it's an actual disorder, and it's characterized by things such as entitled behavior, a lack of empathy, arrogance, needing excessive attention and admiration, or just a grandiose sense of self. And when things were so hard in my home and I was really struggling with behaviors with my son, I saw these same types of things in my own home and wondered, what does this mean? Honestly, I was terrified. I was terrified because what I read online and what I knew about narcissistic behavior is that it oftentimes is the precursor to some really scary things. My heart hurt because I felt like there was just no way out, no solution. In fact, I was told by therapist after therapist with my son that the things that he was struggling with couldn't be helped, that some of the diagnoses that he had been given were some of the hardest to treat. And I was told he was resistant to treatment. I was given a story by professional after professional that really fueled my belief in narcissistic behavior and tendencies in my son. And I was part of the problem, right? I didn't know that I could take a pause, take a step back, and look at what my role was in what I was seeing in my home. I, in my whole heart, believed that if he could just get the right type of treatment, that these behaviors that we were seeing, that we were dealing with, would go away. I thought he needed to be fixed or treated, or that his behaviors needed to be remedied. I was so convicted in this belief that I was desperate to do whatever I could to try and find him help, to alleviate my own fears of what this narcissistic behavior could lead to. I've shared this before, but I'll say it here again that I was convinced that with the behaviors that I saw in my home, the feelings that I was having about my relationship with my son, I was convinced that I would be visiting him in jail or prison someday because I didn't know that not only could I look at things differently, but I didn't know how to meet his unique needs. When I look back then compared to what I know now and what I help parents with now is when I look now at children, and parenting and that whole relationship, I now know that there's so much more powerful tools than I had in my tool belt. I thought that the best way to help my son was treatment for his specific diagnoses, whatever that may be. And treatment looked like medication, therapy. Sometimes we tried some alternative things like acupuncture, um, chiropractics. We tried a variety of things to help alleviate those symptoms. So when I think about the way that I looked at behaviors, I looked at it as partly the experiences that he had when he was younger. And I looked at the behaviors as partly like his genetic makeup. But I now feel so strongly that when we only look at kids through such a tiny part of the bigger picture, and we try to treat behaviors looking through this very clouded lens, finding the right solution is extremely challenging, if not sometimes impossible, because our kids are so much more complex than that. I now I see evidence of it and I feel so convicted, so strongly that we have to look first at ourselves and then at our kids through a variety of lenses. I now know that as parents, we've had our own experiences that cloud the way that we see our kids, right? We were parented a certain way. We had certain experiences in school. Perhaps we've dealt with our own traumas and haven't worked through them, or maybe we have. Um, we also have our own genetic makeup and we have our own unique energetic needs. We have our own human design blueprint, right? Our kids are the same. Our kids have had their own experiences. They have a different genetic makeup than we do. And when our kids are not ours biologically, whether they're stepkids or adopted, then they have a totally different genetic makeup than we do, and perhaps different experiences. But we can't lose sight of, in addition to those parts of who they are, we can't lose sight of their unique energetic needs. I now stand so firmly in the belief that when we parent using human design as one of the many important tools that we use to look at our kids and their behaviors and how to meet their needs, when we use human design, in addition to looking at their conditioning, looking at their personal experiences, looking at their genetic makeup, when we look at our kids through a variety of lenses, oh, and looking at mistaken motivations, we can't forget about that too. And we're going to be going deeper into that in future episodes. But when I look back at the big pieces that I was missing with my son, I was looking at the behaviors and trying to address the behaviors instead of looking at it through what are those unmet energy needs? I can say that as one of the tools that I've had in my tool belt for many decades is trying to understand what those behaviors are communicating. And I think that mistaken motivations is a way to look at that, but at a much, much deeper level that actually gives us the answers. I think in my previous experiences in looking at behaviors, in trying to ask myself, what are those behaviors trying to communicate? I think that that's kind of that first surface layer of us as the adults, the caregivers, the parents, the therapists, the teachers, trying to look at what need is that child trying to communicate. When we dig deeper and look at our kids' behaviors and other people in our lives' behaviors through the lens of mistaken motivations, and really look at how does that person's behavior make me feel, to give me evidence about what their unmet energy needs are, it gives us such a deeper focus. And so, what do I mean by that? Well, when we look at behaviors through the lens of mistaken motivations, what you're really doing is saying, like, when that person acts in a certain way, how does it make me feel? If I see a child, for example, today, took our granddaughter out to dinner, and she's two. And so I took her to the restroom, and while we were in there, I help her get a paper towel to dry her hands, and her response to that is mm-mm, with a grunt and angry look on her face. She vocalized that she didn't want to dry her hands. Well, I now know, instead of looking at that just at that surface level of, you know, what is she trying to communicate? I now look deeper at those behaviors and say, like, okay, how did that make me feel? Because when I look at it through the lens of how did that make me feel, it gives me so much more information about which unmet need she's trying to communicate to me. When our kids are trying to communicate to us through their behaviors, whether it's the toddler in the bathroom or an adolescent son who is acting entitled or lacking empathy, or perhaps bragging about things that aren't even real, and I'm feeling frustrated or irritated or like I want to overpower them, that gives me information and gives me pause to take a step back and say, okay, what energy need is not being met? Because we know that all humans, and especially our kids, they need to feel unconditional love. That's one of those needs that all humans have. We as humans need to feel unconditionally loved. And when we perceive that there are conditions on it, well, chances are we're going to display behaviors. And part of my brain knew that about my son when he was younger, when I was experiencing so many challenging behaviors. Part of me knew that, right, the part of me that attended all of the classes about trauma and attachment and who sat in on his therapy sessions to understand, my brain knew that that unmet need was his need for unconditional love. but I couldn't figure out how to do it. And in the moment, when I was feeling so irritated or frustrated or like I wanted to overpower him because I felt like, and I would say, oh my gosh, this child is controlling the home, right? If I had known about mistaken motivations and human design and his energy needs, I would have handled things so differently. So, unconditional love is one basic human need. Humans also have a need to feel empowered. We know research tells us that kids in particular go through two very distinct phases in their life, that they are growing and expanding and developing in a way that they are seeking more autonomy, more independence. They're trying to figure out where they have control over their own lives. And so as a result, they end up exerting more control, and it's normal. Research tells us that around the age of 2, somewhere between 2 and 5, kids go through power struggles. Society calls it the terrible twos, but the truth is that it's only terrible when we can't quite figure out how to help the child feel empowered. When we help a young child feel empowered, what was previously the terrible twos and kids tantruming is instead kids who are feeling empowered and wanting to help and trying to participate and figure out how they can be, having control over things that are important to them. And when we don't know how to do that, well, then we have children who are tantruming because they can't figure out where they get to have control over their own life. And it's a developmental need of theirs. Kids go through this again in adolescence. It's a normal part of development that kids seek power as they go through adolescence because of the way that their brain is developing and needing that independence, trying to differentiate from their caregivers. It's normal. But as parents, we tend to push back because we feel our kids exerting power, which makes us feel like we've lost control. And so we tend to dig in our heels and engage in this power struggle with our kids. But if we could take a step back and say, oh, they're supposed to be figuring out how they can feel empowered right now. How can I help them with that? Instead of, they're not in charge here. Well, yeah, of course our kids aren't in charge of our household. But if we as adults can continue to reevaluate and figure out how we can help our kids feel a bigger sense of control and empowerment over things that matter to them, well, we will decrease the chances of them exerting that power. They're going to go through it anyways, and some more than others. It depends on their unique human design. But when we know better, we can do better and we can show up differently for our kids. When we understand our kids' unique human design and when we understand these key developmental things that our kids go through and basic human needs, right? Like I said, unconditional love, the need for power, the need to experiment and explore. This is a basic human need to figure out what's out there and to explore and to try new things. And again, some designs, some kids have a unique energetic blueprint that wants to experiment more, wants to explore more. And if as parents, we put out that flame, we teach kids that it's not okay to explore and experiment and try things. We teach our kids that it's not okay to make mistakes, that they have to do things a certain way. Well, imagine what it does to their behaviors, to their sense of self, their sense of self-worth. It's a basic need for our kids to want to explore. We also know that our kids need to feel valued and valuable. They need to feel like they are worthy of being in your family, that they bring value to, their friendships, whatever it might be. And when they feel devalued, well, that's what creates that environment for those behaviors. And when I think back to, right, like we're talking here about narcissistic behavior, and I go through this list, oh, the last one, a basic human need is belonging, right? If your child has unmet needs, they don't feel unconditionally loved, they don't feel like they have power over what is happening in their life, things that impact them, which could be school, it could be their bedroom, it could be where they live, it could be a whole slew of the clothes that they wear, it could be a whole slew of things that they feel like they don't have control over. When our kids don't feel like they can experiment and explore, or they've been conditioned that it's not okay, or when our kids don't feel valued, and when our kids don't feel like they belong, when we look at our kids through that lens of these basic human needs, their energetic needs and their human design, and then go back and look at what we're labeling as narcissistic behavior. And I'm not saying I'm not here to diagnose your kids or take away a diagnosis. That is not at all what I'm doing here. But what I do want to highlight is that in my own pain, my own struggles with my own son, I didn't have these lenses to look at his behavior through. And I really just looked at them as problem behaviors that needed to be fixed, instead of having the tools to take a step back and really ask myself, what are those basic human needs that are unmet right now? And what do I have the power to do to help with that? What is my role as mom to really step up to the plate and stop trying to squash the behaviors, instead to really try to get underneath the behavior and really understand what those unmet needs are so that I can show up with compassion. Because when we look at our kids and think like they lack empathy, they are displaying narcissistic behavior, they're so entitled, they make up these grandiose lies about who they are, how capable they are, right? When we look at our kids through that lens and label them as narcissistic and can't take a step back and really ask ourselves, why? Where is this coming from? We're doing them such a disservice. I say this with such a heavy heart because I didn't know then what I know now, but I know that I had those experiences and that I feel these feelings now so that I can help you to look at your kids differently, so that I can help empower you and make sure that your own needs are met first, right? You yourself must feel unconditional love, which is extremely hard when you have a child who it feels like hates you. You also have your own need to feel valuable, to feel like you belong in your family, in your community. You also have that need to explore and experiment and to feel like you have power over your own friggin' house. Which, when we're dealing with such challenging behaviors, our own values are really compromised. And so I'm not going to give you a practical strategy today. I wanted today to be about, I see you and I've been there. And I didn't have these tools to look at things differently, but I have them now to share with you. So I hope that you take this episode to really look differently at yourself, at your own needs, and at your child's. Because when you're ready, I'm here to give you the next steps to understand your kiddo's unique energetic blueprint and to understand your own, quite frankly. Because when you can look at your kids through mistaken motivations, look at your kids through their human design, you show up so, so differently. So thanks for hanging out today. We will talk soon. I hope that you found this episode so incredibly powerful. Thank you for joining us for Sometimes Love Isn't Enough. If you resonated with what you heard here, please subscribe to this podcast and give us a review. You can also follow us on all the socials. Check the show notes for all the details about how to start tackling behaviors and creating a powerful, loving relationship with your child, a child who needs your love the most. And if your gut's telling you that it's time for a change now, book a free consult. I'd love to help you love unconditionally and show you that you have that power within you.